Okay, imagine a sports channel that only showed you the game-winning shots, the buzzer beaters, the walk-off home runs. You'd get this super exciting but totally skewed picture of how sports are actually played, right? Well, for decades, a lot of scientists have been worried that their own field was doing the exact same thing, only showing off the wins and maybe creating a highlight reel that wasn't exactly reality. So this question, it's kind of been haunting the halls of science for years. It's this nagging fear that for every amazing discovery we hear about, there's a whole bunch of failed experiments, negative results, and just kind of boring findings that get hidden away. This ghost in the machine has a name, the file drawer problem. And for a long time, people thought it was a serious threat to everything we thought we knew. So let's get into this scientific ghost story. The fear was pretty simple, really. What if the very foundations of our knowledge are built on a biased, cherry-picked sample of the evidence? So here's the deal. The file drawer problem is basically this idea that everyone in science, researchers, reviewers, journals, they all prefer exciting, positive findings. And so studies that find, well, nothing, what scientists call null results, they're way less likely to ever get published. Instead, they get metaphorically stuffed into a file drawer. And the real danger here is that our scientific knowledge would be built only on the wins, which could give us this inflated, maybe way too optimistic view of everything from medical treatments to psychological theories. And listen, this wasn't just some casual worry people had. As you can see from this quote from a major psychology journal, it was seen as a real documented threat. The key phrase here is upwardly biased estimates. All that means is that if we only see the successful studies, our big picture summary of all the evidence, what's called a meta-analysis, would be totally skewed high. We might think a drug works better than it really does, or a theory is more solid than it is, all because the evidence that says nope is just sitting in a file drawer somewhere. This was a really serious concern. So, after decades of just speculating and worrying, a group of researchers finally decided to stop guessing and start investigating. They launched this massive study to finally pry open that file drawer and see what was actually inside. And their plan was just brilliantly simple. The logic went like this. If the file drawer problem is real, then the stuff that gets published should look totally different from the stuff that doesn't. The published articles should be jam-packed with flashy, significant findings, right? Meanwhile, the unpublished papers, the stuff in that dusty file drawer, should be full of all those boring, null results. So they decided to compare them head-to-head. These researchers basically became detectives. They launched 5 separate studies, collecting tens of thousands of data points to hunt down this elusive culprit. And what they found, well, it was not at all what the scientific community had been expecting for over 40 years. First, they went straight to the top, the most prestigious published journals. The places you'd expect to find only the big wins. And across almost 38,000 different findings, they discovered that a whopping 46.8% of them were statistically non-significant. Think about that for a second. Almost half of the results in the very best journals were actually null results. That by itself was a huge surprise. Okay, so what about the file drawers themselves? Next, they collected unpublished manuscripts straight from the researchers who wrote them. And the percentage of non-significant findings they found in those papers? 45.5%. Wait a minute, those numbers are basically identical. The supposed graveyard of failed studies looked almost exactly like the highlight reel of published science. And when you lay the evidence out visually like this, the story becomes just undeniable. I mean, look how close those bars are. Published articles and unpublished manuscripts had pretty much the same rate of null results. They even looked at a third category, doctoral dissertations, which are often less filtered, and again, right in the same ballpark. That ghost of the file drawer was starting to look a lot less scary. But hold on, the investigation wasn't over yet. Sure, the rate of significant findings might be the same, but what about their strength? Maybe journals are still biased, just in a different way. Maybe they only publish studies with really powerful, dramatic effects, while the file drawer is full of tiny, weak ones. In scientific terms, they had to compare the average effect size. And folks, this is the climax of the whole investigation. This is the smoking gun. When they compared the average strength of the findings, the results were just staggering. Published articles had an average correlation of 0.2270, and in the unpublished stuff, 0.2279. For all practical purposes, those numbers are identical. The strength of the findings was the same, whether they got published or not. So, with all the evidence on the table, we're talking tens of thousands of data points from 5 different studies. It was finally time to deliver the verdict on this long-held scientific myth. The bottom line is this: that deep-seated fear of the file drawer problem, at least in this whole area of science, it really looks like a myth. The evidence just isn't there to support it. The percentage of null results is the same inside and outside the drawer, and the average strength of the findings is the same too. The data pointed to a clear, unambiguous conclusion. You see, this completely reframes how we should think about it. The file drawer isn't some shameful graveyard for inconvenient truths or embarrassing failures. Nope. It's just a place with more research that, on the whole, looks exactly like the research that does get published. That huge fear of a massive, hidden bias that was twisting our knowledge, it seems to be, thankfully, unfounded. Now, busting a scientific myth like this is more than just an academic game. This finding has some really big implications for how much we can trust the entire scientific process. So, what's the big takeaway for us? Well, first, it means we can have more confidence in those big scientific reviews, the ones that pool all the data to give us a final answer on something. They're probably more accurate than we thought. Second, that whole worry about inflated results from publication bias, it might be seriously overblown. The scientific consensus that informs everything from public policy to medicine is likely built on a much more solid foundation. It also means a lot of the complicated statistical tricks scientists were using to fix this problem might not even be needed. And that leads to the really big one. Our collective scientific knowledge is simply more robust and more trustworthy than we gave it credit for. You know, this whole investigation is just a beautiful example of science doing what it does best. It questions itself and it tests its own beliefs with hard data. It's all about self-correction. And it leaves us with this really fascinating thought. If a belief as common as the file drawer problem could be overturned by evidence, what other scientific urban legends are out there just waiting for their own investigation?